Hi guys, very good evening to you, and this is Ajay. Welcome to the video number 266, and in this video we're going to learn that how to create the pivots using the Excel VBA, and this is going to be the very beginner level of the video, and indeed I will try to put all the things or what you need to take care of while using the pivots, right? And since this is the video number 266, so we have got 265 videos for you, and all those videos are actually on the Excel VBA, MS Access and Access VBA. You can have a look. You can go to my channel if you're watching the channel for the first time. I would like to take just your couple of minutes, and you need to click on the playlist, and under this playlist event playlist category you have all these different categories, right? So the major category is playlist. You click on the playlist link and you would see here Excel VBA event videos, Excel VBA introduction series. We have 5 videos there. If somebody who is just started with the VBA or who wants to learn the VBA, Excel VBA, you can just go ahead and check out all these videos. So we have the videos on the Access macros, Access queries. So guys, actually I'm covering almost all the subjects day by day, right? You can scroll it down and you will find all these amazing videos, and any questions you have, you can leave your comment and definitely I will get back to you. This is actually the way I'm running this channel, and this is simply for the reason that I simply want to make everybody awesome in Excel VBA and Access VBA. And now recently I actually have got a very nice email. I was just reading actually the email. I got little late in replying you. Mehboob Alam actually has written me. I just pasted actually as usual. I do this. So exactly this is what actually he has written. I want to read it out, and this gives me the inspiration, and also this also actually made me observe that I actually haven't really talked about much on the pivots when it comes to the VBA. When it comes to the programming, right? So this is what actually he has written. Hi Ajay, I'm a big fan of your work and your videos have helped me and my colleagues to a great extent. Great, thank you so much, and it really means a lot to me, trust me. These videos are really so helpful. I always recommend for my friends to watch the videos and subscribe to your channel. Well, if you are encouraging people to subscribe to my channel, indeed it is going to be a great help for me as well, and it is going to push me to make further more awesome videos, right? So thank you for putting all the hard work to help us gain knowledge in Excel. Thank you so much again. However, I'm having some issues on a daily task while preparing a macro. Please let me explain it to you. The attached sheet has headers like project numbers, resource name. They are all the headers as well. I'm unable to put all those due to some issues. The resource name should be counted as one of its project and resource are same. So I mean, he has given I have seen his actually Excel. It's a very simple Excel workbook, and there are a couple of headers. So the idea is he actually wants to create the pivot out of that database, right? So let me just close this. So the idea is that's why I thought that guys, we have uploaded so many videos on almost every topic, but I think I haven't talked about the pivots. So this video is dedicated to all those people who actually wants to learn the pivots in the VBA, right? So I assume if you know the pivots, then please watch this video. If you do not know the pivots, maybe you can go ahead and watch first of all the Excel pivot, how to create the pivots, right? Then you can come back and learn this, because in this video I'm really not going to tell you how to make the pivots, but I'm going to tell you that how to make the pivots in the Excel VBA. Okay, all right. So this is going to be the very introduction session, and we're going to start with this, a very simple database. As you can see, I have some employee IDs, I have name, and I have score. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to create the pivot out of it, right? Now I want to tell you first of all that when you create the pivots in the VBA, they are very simple. They are, trust me, very simple, right? And the best part is you can record them, right? There are some failures, obviously. For that we can actually manipulate the things. We can edit the macro editors, and we can make really very awesome, pretty awesome code actually. So let's start with this. Now how to create the pivot out of it, that's the first thing we need to do, right? So in this case now, so what I'm actually doing, Mr. Khwaja, I'm actually starting this pivot series, and then what you can do is, after watching this video, you can go back and work on your that data which you have shared with me, and if you still face any issue, just revert me back and I will directly work on your database. But I don't want to just want to give you the solution without really talking about the pivots, right? So I want to start with the pivots. Then I think it is also not going to be a spoon feeding. Once you understand the pivots, this basic chapter, you can easily make out the pivots from your data. And anyways, if you would have any problem, just leave out the comments on this video, right? Or anybody who is watching this. Okay, so the first thing is you need to make the pivot. Now I want to make the pivot of this where I can have the employee ID and name and score, whatever you want to actually do. Okay, so I'm going to simply start with this, how you make the pivots. I'm going to click on the insert, and as I said that I hope that you know the pivots, right, in the Excel, how to create it, because I'm not going to tell you actually how to create the pivots. When you click on the insert pivot, this is the table, and this is what the table I'm going to actually use, and I simply press OK. Once you press OK, you will have this, you know, the playlist. If it is not coming, no problem, you can right click on the pivot and you can say show field list. It would come. Now I'm going to drag quickly this everything over here, right, this one, and I'm going to put the scores here, right? And by the way, are we recording the macro? I don't think so. Oh my mistake, actually we didn't record the macro. Let me quickly delete this. All right guys, so sorry, we need to record the macro. I need to record all the steps. So this is called the macro 4. Press OK, and let's quickly now go to the insert again and click on the pivot, and the table range, I'm going to select the table. So you selected the table, you press OK, and this field list, I'm going to drag this employee ID here, and I'm gonna drag this name, and the score is a number, so I'm going to put it here, and it is going to be the sum of the score. Right now, afterwards I go to the design view, and in the design view what I will do, I will go to the report layout, and I want to make it in the tabular form so that everything looks neat and clean. And these headers, which right now you see that as a row label, they should also change. So the moment you click on that, this is how the data would look like, and this is really nice. And I don't need this total, basically 12 total, 22 total, so I just go to the subtotal, and I say that do not show subtotal. Okay, so I've recorded these steps. Now let me just close this, stop recording. Okay, the macro is stopped. Now I'm simply going to delete this. I'm going to delete this. Okay, now what is the thing we want to do? So if you go to the Visual Basic, and if you click on the there are actually already a lot of modules which I have created. Yeah, this is the module actually, guys, macro 4, if you remember, right? So this is the code which Excel has generated. Let me backspace it. Now you can see that it has created a lot of things, and they look little difficult, but they are very easy to understand. Let me give some spacing here, and then we will see that what exactly is happening. Now you see, guys, the pivots actually belongs with the there are two things. One is the pivot cache, and one is called the pivot. Now pivot, you use it to refer to the pivot, and the pivot cache, you use it for the data, from where actually the data is coming. If you look at this command, active workbook dot pivot cache, it says dot create, and source is Excel database, and the source type is Excel database. Obviously it is a Excel database, and source type actually it is using the sheet 1, R1, C1, and R5, C5, 3. So this actually simply means this is nothing. I mean, this looks like a crap, I'm sorry to say that, but we can edit it, right? This simply means that from range A1 to the C5, so we will use it like this, dot create pivot table. That's it. Table destination, where you want to use the pivot table, where you want to put the pivot table. So I want to put the pivot table, let's say, on the F6. So I'm going to write here simply F6, and the name of the pivot can be anything, pivot table 3, pivot table 4, whatever you want to call it. I will name it, let's say, Ajay, okay, which is my name, right? Default version is not required. Let's keep it like this. So thereafter, you see show field pivot table list. Pivot table list, if you remember, where we actually added all these things. I got this employee ID added on the row, and I got this, you know, the name again, you know, get added on the row field. And if you just scroll it down, you see that this is called the score, right? Score actually is now named as sum of the score. And if you have a look, you know, this entire line, this says dot add data field, and then the pivot field score, sum of score, Excel sum. This is called the Excel row field, and this is called the sum, right? And there, active workbook show field list equals to false, which means that you don't want to actually have the field list coming on. So it just, you know, actually using this command, it is going to disappear. And the next line is this is the tabular row, if you remember. Okay, I given the name this as a tabular form by going to the, if you remember, by going to the, when I created the pivot, let me just rerun this. Insert pivot table, we selected the table. Now where you need to put the table, I selected this range, right? This is the step which I was telling you. When you clicked OK, the pivot would come. Anyways, just a second, let me change. First of all, give the data complete. This is your data, and now I click OK. The pivot inserts on this active cell, and this is what I was talking. These are called the rows, and these are called the values. So here what you see is Excel row field. That means the item is going to be inserted. This item is going to be inserted in the row field. If you will drop this item here, then you would see there as kind of, I think, dot page, some sort of that. You can record the macro and you can see, right? There's really no need to learn it. And then when you're gonna drag it to the values, this is what you see: Excel sum, because you are actually summing, right? If you want to take the average, you will see here that average, right? So this is the tabular row. Tabular row means when you add something, like you see that I added these things and you know that they are not properly aligned. This is really not giving you a good presentation, right? So I went to the design view and I'm going to click on the report layout and tabular form. So this is exactly what macro actually has generated for me. This one, this line, Excel tabular row, right? Axis layout is the Excel tabular row. And thereafter, if you remember what I did, I removed all these totals like 12 total, 22 total, because this is not really required. So what I did, I went to the subtotal and I clicked on the do not show subtotal. So the same line is recorded here. This is the line active sheet dot pivot tables and the pivot table 3, which is the name of the pivot, and then it has selected all the arrays like employee ID, and then so this is basically a next line. I can press enter here. This is how the things are happening, right? So it created all these arrays in the false mode. The subtotal, you can see the word is coming here, right? So it's very actually simple. So this is how you can make the your own programming. So let us now go ahead and create our own actually the programming. So what is the first thing? Let me just name this as a create pivot. I'm going to use the pivot. So the first thing which I will do, when you create the pivot, you need to define your object as a pivot. So I write here PT. PT is anything. You can write your name as well. That's fine, right? Declare it as a pivot table. Pivot table. What is the next thing? There is a cache, pivot cache also, right? Which actually is going to hold the source from where the pivot is going to, capture that data and going to give you the summarization of the report. So I'm going to write here PT, let's say cache, right? Or maybe you can write PTCA. That's fine, right? So this is what you will declare it, pivot cache. Okay. Now comes the important part. The important part is this line, how to actually form the pivot, because pivot always uses the data. So I'm going to copy this and going to paste it in this module just to give you the idea. Okay, now this is the line which is generated by the Excel, but I can make it very simple, guys. Like, look at this. We'll start with the active workbook. Okay, pivot cache, and then create, obviously, and then you start the bracket. So here your pivot actually uses what? Is it using any Excel consolidation, or is it using the Excel database, or any external pivot, pivot table? Is it using any other pivot table? So there are a lot of options, but you just need to, use this Excel database, which you can see here, right? Comma, no need to write the source type colon and equals to. This is just for the additional information, and I really don't want to do that. Okay. Now what is the next thing? Source data. Now source data means from where it is going to use the data, and you know that if you're on the sheet 1. So this is how I'm going to write sheets, and then within the quotes I'm going to write the sheet name, and now give the range, because that is going to be my source range, and A1 to C5. Okay, done. All right, close the bracket. Right now you are on the source data version. You don't really require it. Just close the bracket, press dot, and now the next is create pivot table. You don't want to create the pivot chart, obviously, I know, right? So pivot table, I have created it. Now to go to the next line, because this is really a long syntax, I can write it in one line as well, but you can also use the underscore, right? Just give it a space and write underscore and come to the next line. Okay, this is to go to the next line. Now if you remember the, or just to explain you, because we should not lose our parameters, the moment I press space, you get to see this. Now this says that the table destination, basically. So where exactly you want to put this pivot, that's what they are asking you. So I'm going to put my pivot sheets and then sheet 1. So I'm going to put it on let's say D10 or E10, maybe range E10. On the E10 my pivot should get formed. That's what actually I'm writing in here. Okay, now if you press comma, you get to see another parameter which is called the table name. So what is my pivot name? Because pivot also holds name, right? If you have watched my series on the charts, where we have automated everything using the charts, because I have also, guys, uploaded a video on the VBA charts from the very basic level. It's a mixture of all the things, right? So their charts also have the name. Similarly, pivots also have the names, right? So I'm gonna give that name as Ajay, you know, to my pivot, and default and read version I don't need that, so as simple as that. Now this makes really much more sense, guys. You can see here, right? It's not like R1 C1 and all that stuff. It's very much readable, and you can see that the first parameter is, which is this source type. The type is Excel database, and thereafter what is the source data. So this is my source data coming from this range A1 to, you know, C5, and the pivot table is going to be created on E10, which is, you would see the pivot table over here in the E10 cell, right? And the pivot name is going to be Ajay, as simple as that, right? So I'm just going to actually delete everything here. Okay, now what is the next thing I want to do? Obviously, so we don't need this line. I can simply, you know, delete it. I just wanted to actually explain you that how easy it is to work with the pivots using the macro editor. I come back to my module, and now you see that here we have a lot of codes with active sheet.pivot table, pivot table 3, employee ID. The orientation has to be Excel row field. You remember the row field I was talking about, right? So what you can do is you can copy this entire stuff. Let me copy this entire stuff like this, because this is what exactly I want to do with my pivot, right? So I copy this and I come back to the module and I just write here. Okay, now one thing which is very important, you need to understand, your pivot table has a name called Ajay. So this pivot table 3 should be replaced, and I hope that you know that the shortcut key to replace is Control H, and not only works in the Excel, but it also actually works in the VBA. So I'm just going to use the Control H. This is the additional bonus I'm, you know, giving you guys if you don't have any idea how to replace this. So just going to write that pivot table 3. Now pivot table 3 should be replaced with what? Ajay. Okay, now how are we gonna do that? Now if you click on the current module, it will work only on this module. If you click on the current procedure, it is going to work only within this macro. If you're going to write here that current project, you know, then it is going to work on all, it is going to run on all the modules. So I'm just going to keep it procedure, because I just want to focus on this macro, which is called the create pivot. So I will try to find it out. It has found this pivot table 3 and I will replace it. There we go. I will again replace it. It is moving, it is going forward. Pivot 3 is now, you can see that it is actually being replaced, right? Because we have a name called Ajay, which I have given to the pivot table. That's it. I think we are done. All right, now see this, guys, what is going to happen. Let me just close this, and let's start with the F8 mode. We will not run it quickly, and we will see that how the things are working. So there we go. Let's start this. Now this should create a pivot, right? I run it and you see that the pivot is created, and the pivot starts from the E10, exactly the E10 which I was telling you. If you scroll it down, by the way, let me just increase the width of this, and let's go ahead and do this. Now you can see that I've got the pivot here. Okay, pivot is inserted, and at the same time it is actually on the E10, you can see here. All right, now this line is for what? This line actually is for the show field list. So if I run this, the field list would come, but it's not really required. You can even delete this line, right? But I'm going to show you so that you can understand what exactly I'm saying. Now when you run this, this says that the field list is going to be true, and now what will happen, eventually they keep on adding the fields, different fields. Like for example, the employee ID is going to be added to the pivot field, and orientation is going to be the row field. So if I run this, see what happens. You get to see here in the row label employee IDs. Perfect. You can see here how it is happening. Okay, I further go ahead and run this, enter. Now there is another field name which is called name. As you can see, that is also going to be used in the Excel row, and the position is going to be 2. So position 2 means that it would come after the employee ID, which is this. If you change this, you can change. You can put here position 2 and you can put here position 1. That is also fine. But then you need to, you know, move this on the top side. I mean to the you need to move this above this line, so that first this should be added. So now again you can see that it is added. Now what we need to do with the active sheet, the pivot table name which is called Ajay, okay, you need to add the data field. Now data field, which means the score, I want to add it to the data side, and I want to add it using the Excel sum operator. So when you do that, sum of score is coming here. So you can also change the name of here. I mean, if you want this, instead of the sum of score, you should write something else. You can do that, right? So maybe I can say that my score. Okay, but remember, you can't write the score. If you do this kind of a stuff, you will have the error, because score is already a header and pivot will not, is not going to allow you to create a list which exactly looks like the name of your database. So you need to write something else. Maybe you can write my score as well. That's fine. Okay, if I reset the code and I run this again, let me quickly run this. Let me delete this. Let's see how it is going to bring the change. So I just go to this, and now I will run this quickly. Pivot is created. There we go. There we go. Okay, now this is the important line. Now if I run this, you see that my score is coming, right? So you can do a lot of things, right? You can change the code, you can modify the code. Active.show pivot list equals to false. That's fine. Just keep it like this. Now this is very important. It's going to give this a tabular shape. So if I run this, you see that this is how it comes, and then thereafter all the the arrays of this, basically the subtotal 12 and 22, 33, everything is going to be removed, right? You remember the subtotal option, right? This subtotal. So this is going to run like this, and there we go, guys. Your pivot is formed. So how easy it is? I don't think so. It's really tough. It's very easy. You didn't really do anything. You just recorded the macro. And if you go to the design view, here in the analyze, I'm using Excel actually 2016, but in your case you won't, if you're using any version like 2010 or 2007, you would not be able to see this analyze. So whatever the option you have there, I am really not able to remember that layout or what exactly it is, but just click on this option under the pivot table tool list. This gets highlighted when you select the pivot. Actually, if you select outside the cell, that option won't come, right? So you select the pivot, and then you need to see here the pivot table name. So this is exactly the name which we have created, guys. Okay, so now the next time if I run the same code again, if I run this macro again, let's say, because as my subscriber also said that he actually makes the pivot every day. So if I run this, you see it is going to generate the error, and the reason is quite simple, because in the pivot Ajay is already created, and you cannot create the pivot with the same name, right? So this cannot be, this is not going to work. So if I name this let's say as Ajay1, and now if I run this, then obviously you have to change the entire code. You will also have to write here, let me quickly change it and let me show you. So I'm going to keep this Ajay1 like this. So completely replace this. Let's say we are replacing this, replace all. All right, there we go. So everywhere this is replaced, and let us run this now. So I'm going to run this code. A pivot table report cannot overlap the another pivot table report. Obviously makes sense, because you are saying that the pivot should start from the E10. In the E10 there is already pivot which has a name called Ajay, right? So that is again one more challenge. So let's say if I do this, if I change the direction, I just make it, let's say maybe I can make it E20. Okay, now I run the code. You can see that the pivot is created, right? Unable to get the pivot worksheet class. So here also we have some problems, right? So basically the point is, I mean, what I'm trying to actually say is that you see, once you create the pivot, and every day if you're creating the pivot name has to be same. If you're creating Ajay pivot, every time it should delete the pivot first, and then it should recreate the pivot. That's what exactly we are talking about here. Okay, so this is what we really need to do it. And by the way, let me have a look here why we are getting the error. We are getting the error actually because of this Ajay 11. I think there was some mistake in the control H. This should be actually Ajay 1. Let me reset the code, and if I delete this and I run the code again, let's see if we can get through it, and there we go. All right, so we have again error, and the error is it says Ajay 1. It's not getting created. So why Ajay 1 has creating a problem for us? Let me just run this again. Unable to get the pivot table property of the worksheet class. So with the active sheet pivot tables Ajay 1. All right, so let's first of all look what name actually it is created for this pivot. Yeah, that's what exactly I was talking about. This is Ajay 11. You can see, guys, right? So you see I can actually find out the reasons why the error is coming. When you design, if you go to the analyze, you have a name called Ajay11. So Ajay11 if it's created, how can you edit the Ajay1? Obviously makes sense, right? Because Ajay1 is not a pivot. And why it happened? Because of my mistake. I guess this should be Ajay1. So I think there is some problem which happened while we were replacing it, right? So that is why, guys, I always replace the thing step by step. If you remember the first time when I replaced, I used step by step option, right? I didn't replace all. Okay, so let's have a look. I think Ajay1 is all over the place, and now actually we should be able to run this code. So let me delete this again. So you understanding the concept, what is happening here, right? You can't use the same pivot again and again, and also you cannot, even if you record the macro, you need to ensure that the name which you are using, it should be used below as well. It should not happen that here you have created Ajay11 and then you are referring to Ajay1, and it for VBA it is not going to make any sense. So let me run this code again. There we go, guys. You see that the pivot is created, and I can have a look here in the analyze. It says Ajay1, perfect, and this one is, you can see it's Ajay. But the point is, every time when you create the pivot on the same database, let's say this is your daily task, obviously you would not like to run it again and keep on adding the pivots. So in order to do that, what we need to do is we need to actually delete the pivot first. Whenever you run the macro, first it checks if the pivot exists by that name, and then it deletes it, and then it moves forward. Now because we have named this pivot as this Ajay, so I would like to delete it first as well, because tomorrow also I will be working on the same pivot but with the new data. Okay, so what you can do is you can quickly go ahead and again record the macro. I know the code, but I want to tell you, because as a beginner you should be able to capitalize these recording macro skills on your VBA programming. So I record the macro. This is macro 5. Now what I'm going to do is look at this. I go to the design mode, analyze this option, and I click on the select and entire pivot table. Right now, in your case, as I said, that you will not see the analyze option, but this looks like this entire pivot table. You selected the entire pivot table, and then what you can do, you can simply delete it, or you can also click on the clear and clear all. Right, if you clear all, what happens, the pivot would remain there. You can see that pivot still is not removed. So I undo it. Okay, and what you need to do, you need to press delete if you completely want to wipe it off. So I just click on the delete, and now the pivot is gone. Let's quickly go to the recording and stop it, and let me have a look on the code. So this is the code, as you can see, which is generated active sheet.pivot tables, and the pivot name, pivot table select, and selection.clear content. So let's just cut this. I'm going to copy or cut, whatever you want to do. Let me just cut this because I don't need it here, and I'm going to use it here. Right, selection dot clear content, and this is very important, guys, the same name. Okay, so now it is going to remove this table. Okay, the pivot. Now you can see here that I don't have a pivot here, because there is no, the first time when you are going to run this, obviously you will not have any pivot. So if I run this line right away, it will give the error because there is no pivot by this name. Right, so in that case we can do one thing. We can simply write here one line on error, resume next, which means that I know that the error would definitely come, but just bypass it. Right, so when you run this, now the code will not stop, and now as you know that the pivot is going to be created. There we go. You can see in the background the pivot is actually created, and the pivot is created. Okay, I have to change the location actually, because we actually changed it to A20, so I prefer to on the A10. Okay, now look at this. The next time when the code is going to run, what will happen, it will first delete this pivot. There we go. Okay, now it's not actually, it did not select the pivot table, and we need to find it out why it has not selected, and you are not able to see the error because of the on error resume next. So I'm just going to comment this out, and now let's have a look, because from the errors we learn a lot. Unable to get the pivot table property of the worksheet class. So this actually line which I have written here, this is not creating the magic. The reason is simple, because again I'm doing a mistake, guys. Well, because the name of the pivot is Ajay1, so you cannot write here Ajay, you have to delete the Ajay1. So I just gonna write here Ajay1. Now if I run the code, you see that it has selected the table, and the pivot is removed. So I press F5, and there we go, guys, the pivot is done. right? So now you can definitely go ahead and remove this line. Okay, because on a resume next, if you're going to use it, you will not never get the error. And I know that, you know, if you don't get the error, then you will not be able to trace which line is giving the error, right? So this line we are using for the first time when everything is going to be deleted. For example, when you send this code to somebody and he runs the program, there will be no pivot and this line will give the error. So we want to simply bypass it, and that's why I've written here. But now if you run this, you see that the pivot is coming. I am again running it, I'm again running it, I'm again running it. You keep on running it and it keeps on giving the same results. And yes, if you change the data, if I write here, let's say Ajay, and I write here some different names, okay, then what will be the answer? You can write here, let's say, these numbers. Okay, now if you go ahead and run the pivot, you will get the different result. Look at this, very nice, right? So this is how the pivots are, you know, we make the pivots. And I think because I've uploaded so many videos on VBA, and you might be knowing this, I really don't see any other thing which can be of so much help, you know, using the macro editors, other than the finding the last row and, you know, selecting the entire database. I mean, if you don't remember those syntaxes, you can simply record the macro and you can take the help out of, you know, from those syntaxes. I have talked about all this in the introduction to VBA series. You can go ahead and watch that, right? But I think when it comes to the pivots, you are really very lucky that macro editor actually does the, you know, the entire job for you, and then you can convert that into your own coding. So this is really very simple, right? So guys, this is how you can record the macro, do all the steps, and then define it in your own way, and ensure that it should be deleted as well. I will be back with some more exciting stuff. And my dear subscriber, if you have any question, thank you for such a, you know, wonderful email, because I think because of your email I just realized that I haven't really uploaded the videos on the pivots, right? So we are going to start the pivot series on the same. If you have any questions, just you know, don't hesitate, just throw your questions on me and I will get back to you definitely. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, guys, please do that. And as always, you know, I will be back with some more exciting stuff. Until then, you take care of yourself and have a very happy learning. Thanks so much. Bye bye.